How much could this potentially save each business if this fringe benefits tax is wound back?
Well, it depends on the individual tax circumstances of individual businesses. I mean, but what we are doing is we are lifting the threshold for small businesses for tax purposes from 10 million to 50 million. And I mean, that will benefit, as you've just said, about 20,000 additional businesses, which used to employ about 1.7 million Australians. And so, what we're clearly seeking to do here is to help reduce their costs, leave them with more of their own money so that they can invest in their future growth and success and hire more Australians again.
Is that a concession that the FBT is too restrictive?
Well, no, what it is a measure to support small business. And I mean, we've lifted the threshold of small businesses from any business with a turnover of up to 10 million to any business with a turnover of up to 50 million. And so what we've done here is, as part of a suite of measures, and there'll be more in the budget next week, of course, as part of a suite of measures to support businesses, invest in their future growth and success. This is a very significant one.
Some businesses have called for that tax to be scrapped entirely. Would you ever consider that?
Well, that is not something that's on the table. And what we've done today is obviously make significant additional concessions to 20,000 additional businesses, and I'm sure that will be welcomed today by those businesses.
Will you be extending the home loan deposit scheme?
The budget will be delivered on Tuesday, and I commend it to you.
Can you give us a preview, Minister? You know the numbers, you know what's in it. Give us a sense of what it is going to be. The Prime Minister's already said that it is going to be the most important budget since World War II. How would you describe it?
Well, it is an incredibly important budget to lay the foundations, for the best possible economic and jobs recovery into the future. I mean, we've been hit with an unexpected pandemic earlier this year. We worked hard to cushion the blow. We've worked hard since then to recover as many jobs as possible. But moving forward, we've got to ensure that we get ourselves back onto the strongest possible trajectory in terms of the additional number of jobs and the additional number of opportunities for Australians as possible.
Just onto aged care, we had the report that came out yesterday that suggests that it was deplorable when it comes to infection controls. This is the aged care sector I'm talking about here. It's been a traumatised workforce. I understand that you're not the minister responsible for this, but did the government fail in its duty to protect those in aged care?
Well, clearly, we could have done better. There's no question. And I mean, that is, why the Prime Minister initiated the Royal Commission into the aged care sector, in the first place, because clearly there were deficiencies that were needing to be addressed, and 6 recommendations have been made. I mean, we've put substantial additional resources into the aged care system, more than $1.6 billion since the beginning of the pandemic. But the recommendations in this report will help to further lift the performance, across that very important sector, and that is as it should be.
So is aged care a priority spend for you next week?
Well, aged care has been a priority spend for us for some budgets and budget updates. Now it will be again next week, clearly. But I mean, if you look at what we've invested in, what we've committed in additional resources into aged care over the last number of years, it's been very substantial.
But this report that came out yesterday, does that change any numbers for you at all?
Well, we obviously were aware of where this was headed, and indeed, out of the 6 recommendations, we've already made substantial progress in implementing 4 of them. But we will continue to work very hard to get ourselves in the best possible position.
Just on to borders, the West Australian Premier Mark McGowan has accused other states of greed when it comes to borders. What's your reaction to that?
Well, Mark McGowan yesterday was running an economic protectionist argument in favour of continued state border closures. And I mean, economic state protectionism is explicitly prohibited in the Australian Constitution. As Australians, we enjoy certain freedoms, and that includes the freedom to travel freely across Australia, to do business freely across Australia, to spend our money freely where we choose to spend our money. Now, in the context of a pandemic and, in the context of public health reasons, to protect the public health of the population. There's an argument in favour of the sorts of restrictions that have been put in place in recent months. But when it comes to the Northern Territory and South Australia in particular, I mean, the Northern Territory and South Australia have been in a better, stronger position when it comes to COVID-19 than Western Australia consistently for some time. I mean, they've had zero locally acquired community transmission for months on end. I mean, for most of the period, they've had zero active cases, and any active case in South Australia was detected in quarantine, appropriately detected in quarantine. I mean, it's, clearly, I mean, the people of Western Australia deserve to know that if zero active cases and zero locally acquired community transmission in South Australia and the Northern Territory is not good enough to restore the freedoms that we are entitled as Australians to enjoy, then the Premier needs to explain to people, what is enough? What are the objective, predictable criteria to let West Australians enjoy their freedoms as Australians that are guaranteed under our Constitution?
Well, he still says, and he still maintains, as Anastasia Palaszczuk does as well, that nothing's going to change until there are 28 days of no community transmission.
Well, the thing that has just really concerned me yesterday is that, I mean, he wasn't even trying to run a public health argument because, quite frankly, there is no public health argument in favour of preventing West Australians travelling freely to South Australia or South Australians travelling freely to Western Australia. There is no public health argument. I mean, South Australia and the Northern Territory are both demonstrably in a better position than Western Australia. So he's been running instead a state protectionist argument. Now, there might be a question and a discussion in relation to the validity of border closures, state border closures based on health grounds, and I accept that and the government accepts that. But there is certainly no reason to keep state borders closed based on state economic protectionist grounds.
But what he's doing is popular. He's got the majority of support when it comes to polls out of the West. Anyway, just as the same as Anastasia Palaszczuk does in Queensland. So he's got all the power. Do you feel like, despite protestations to the contrary, that the federal government's got its hands tied behind its back on this one?
Well, let's just see how this continues to develop. More and more people in Western Australia are being inconvenienced. More and more people in Western Australia are negatively impacted, either because they can't visit their loved ones or can't have their kids visit from interstate into Western Australia, or businesses that can't freely engage with businesses in other jurisdictions that are COVID safe, supply chain disruptions. I mean, there's a negative impact on the economy in Western Australia. I mean, the Premier yesterday was talking about West Australians spending more money interstate. Well, let me tell you, the tourism operators in Western Australia consistently tell me that interstate visitors spend way more at tourism facilities in Western Australia than West Australians visiting tourism facilities in Western Australia. So, I mean, Western Australia is getting harmed economically. We are losing jobs because of those ongoing restrictions. Families are being inconvenienced, and unless there is a good public health reason for that, then I think the Premier will find it increasingly difficult to justify what he's doing, and over time I'm confident that public opinion will reflect that.
Meanwhile, and just finally, Minister, as our reporter Brendan Smith said, when it comes to Queensland anyway, a short time ago, that it's likely that the border will reopen to more of New South Wales just before the election.
Well, Queensland has also already reopened its borders, to the ACT. Apparently Western Australia still considers the ACT to be, very dangerous, even though zero active cases and zero locally acquired community transmission in the ACT. So, I mean, I think that Western Australia is uniquely restrictive in terms of the individual freedoms of individual Australians living in Western Australia.
Okay. Finance Minister Mathias Cormann, busy couple of days for you. Thank you for your time this morning. We'll see you in Canberra next week.